This is a story called The Personal Vendetta. There are three young families living in a remote countryside village. There's the Sugden family, the Appleby family and the Jones family. The Sugdens and the Jones have been at war for years. The Sugdens are a decent hard-working family who tend to keep themselves to themselves. However, the Jones family are a bunch of troublemakers who cause trouble no matter where they go. Monday, Scott Sugden told his parents that Paul Jones had been bullying him at school and at home when he played outside. Scott was only nearly 7 years old, but Paul had just turned 11 years old and was about to move up to high school in September. It turned out that Scott was playing football with his friends in the school playground, and he kicked the ball too high by mistake and it hit Paul, making him lose his temper. Even though Scott apologised straight away, Paul picked him up and pinned him against the wall and threatened him. He said to him, "If you do that again, I will break both your kneecaps." As you can imagine, little Scott was quite shaken and scared. After this, Paul picked on little Scott at every opportunity, not just at school, but when he saw him outside of school too. Scott's parents couldn't understand why Scott had changed from being a funny little boy who was always telling jokes to a withdrawn, tearful, naughty little boy, until Scott told them what had been going on with Paul. As you can imagine, Scott's parents, Sarah and Carl, were very annoyed. They went to see Paul and his parents, but it only resulted in Paul's dad punching Carl and them both fighting. Sarah and Carl even went to the school, but it didn't make a difference and Paul continued to bully little Scott. Carl was out working on his farm one day when he saw Paul and some of his friends pushing little Scott about and making him cry. Carl went over as quick as he could to save Scott. He said to Paul, "If you hurt my boy again or threaten him again, I will go see your parents and the school again. If they don't stop you, believe me, the police will." The following day, Carl was approached by Paul's dad, who said to him, "Why did you threaten my son? You had no right to threaten my boy, Sugden." "I had every right because your boy had been bullying my son, Scott." "Your son's twice the size of Scott," said Carl. At that point, all hell broke loose and the men began to fight. Mr. Appleby, who along with his wife and their two teenage kids, Luke and Rachel, had been living in the village for about 6 months, had to break up the fight. Then both Scott and a couple of his friends walked in, followed by Paul and his friends. Scott's nose was burst and one of his eyes was cut and swollen. "Is this your doing, Paul?" said Carl. "Yes, and he'll get it again in a minute if he's not careful," said Paul. He was unaware that his dad was there in the pub and that he'd heard everything. After that day, Paul never bothered Scott again. A few weeks after the incident with Scott and Paul, the local teenagers were given permission to have a party in the local village hall by the manager. A couple of hours into the party, Ben Jones turned up with his brother James and started to cause trouble. Luke Appleby politely asked them to leave, but they refused and began banging into people and pushing them out of the way. Luke asked them to leave again, but they refused and continued to push people out of the way and banging into them. This escalated into a full-scale riot and the police were called. They knew that the Jones were responsible and arrested them straight away. Of course, they denied everything until the police showed them the CCTV footage. Then, of course, they admitted everything. They were given a police caution and told that if they do anything wrong again, they won't get off so lightly. The end. Thank you.